want to talk a little bit about the flower communion because it is a cherished ritual in Unitarian Universalism. This flower communion, I want to tell you the story of how it was created, with a special focus on the man who created it and the times he lived and died in. His name was Norbert Čapek, and he lived in what is now Czechoslovakia. And like now, that part of the world was in a war. It was World War II. Čapek died in Dachau because of his beliefs. And I think it's really important that we see this flower communion today, not only as a story in our history, but also as one very relevant to our times and the struggle in our worlds right now. I think Patrick needs another flower. And again, that is totally fine, right? I love it. I want to thank the Unitarian Universalist Association and Reverend Kimberly Dubas for their extensive history of Reverend Dr. Čapek. And I'm not going to give it all to you, but I want to ground this in what is happening in the world. Čapek came from a small village in the southern part of what was then Bohemia. He came from a poor family, and after leaving school, he trained as a tailor. But his great love was religion, religious ideas, and church communities. He was converted to the Baptist church and eventually trained as a Baptist minister. His ministerial work in Prague was successful, but under the influence of various teachers and writers, including lectures from the great preachers of the social gospel, Walter Rauschenbach, he became more and more convinced that Christianity should have a distinctly social message, that God was to be regarded as a parent of the human family, the human Jesus as an elder sibling, and that our task was to create a new and better society for everyone. As his religious ideas became increasingly liberal, he became active in an international religious organization now called the International Association for Religious Freedom. At their 1910 conference in Berlin, he met active Unitarians, including officers of the American Unitarian Association. Čapek also attended conferences in London and Copenhagen and Boston and Oxford. He left Czechoslovakia for a while, living and working in America as a journalist. There, he became more interested in Unitarian theology and connected to the American Unitarian Association. With the support of the AUA and British Unitarians, he was able to establish a new religious movement in Prague. It flourished with large congregations and an active children's program. Among the members of this congregation in Prague were many ex-Catholics. Anyone ex-Catholics in the house? Who, reacting strongly against the Catholic faith, had come to find the traditional communion service with bread and wine unacceptable. He felt that they needed some sort of communion ceremony, and in 1923, he turned to the native beauty of their countryside for elements of a communion service that could be meaningful to all of them. The flower communion soon became one of their most significant services, and under his inspiring leadership, this new liberal religious movement flourished in Prague and elsewhere in the country. Over the next decade, Čapek was acclaimed as one of the nation's leading orators and wrote more than 90 hymns, 3 of which are in our Unitarian Universalist hymnal now. Things did not remain so calm. In 1938, when it became clear that the Nazis would invade Czechoslovakia, Čapek's friends urged him to leave the country. His wide reputation as a religious liberal, his activities as a hymn writer, a newspaper editor, preacher, teacher, and lecturer put him in a dangerous position. He refused to go, but his wife Maja left at the last moment. Čapek continued his work, which became increasingly risky. Čapek found that his church could play a role in protecting Jews in Prague because Unitarianism, as practiced in the earliest 20th century Europe, remained monotheistic. Čapek was able to accept a number of Jews into membership, thus protecting them from being rounded up by the Gestapo. This gave them precious time to plan their escape from the country. In 1940, this merciful plan was discovered, and Čapek and his daughter Zora were arrested. She for the crime of listening to the BBC on the radio, and he for the same offense and for high treason. Several of his sermons were listed as evidence for the later charge. Listening to foreign broadcasts was a capital offense under the Nazi protectorate, something that we're still seeing in Russia now. Eventually, he was sent to Dachau concentration camp, Zora to a labor camp. Almost a year after his arrest, Čapek's name appears among prisoners sent on October 12, 1942, to Hartheim Castle near Linz, Austria, where he died of poison gas. Before his death, Čapek's courage in the face of torture and starvation was a source of inspiration to his fellow prisoners. Some of those who survived testified that the Unitarian leader could not have been sent to a place where he was more needed than Dachau. Fortified by his words and example, they held on, despite the grim agonies of the camp, which was to live in history as a horrible example of Nazi bestiality. When news of Dr. Čapek's death reached America in 1945, the then president of the American Unitarian Association, Dr. Frederick May Elliott, wrote, "Another name is added to the list of heroic Unitarian martyrs, by whose death our freedom has been brought." Today, we are celebrating the ritual that Čapek created to celebrate freedom and connection, to honor this ordinary man who did extraordinary things. Now, there are many reasons this ritual is not just a ceremony or a blessing, but an actual communion. Čapek realized that the form of Christian communion was meaningful and thus borrowed key elements of consecration, partaking, and blessing. What he hoped was that just as Christians hope to commune with God, we would commune with one another. But there are other elements of the Christian sacrament that Čapek probably didn't anticipate being quite so important. In the Christian communion, there are words of remembrance. The Gospels report that Jesus said, "Do this in remembrance of me." And so I am encouraging you to remember Čapek when we do our communion of flowers. But also in the Christian communion, there is an element of sacrifice. According to the Gospel of Luke, Jesus says, "This is my body, which is given for you." For Christians, communion is a time to remember sacrifice of all of those who have given for our faith, and to renounce, and folks who have died for this, rather than renouncing the truth of love and justice as they see it. And so we too remember Reverend Dr. Norbert Čapek, and we honor his sacrifice for religious freedom. Čapek could not have imagined we would be doing this ritual across the world, but thanks to his wife, who taught the flower communion first in London and then at First Parish in Cambridge, Massachusetts, we do. But I suspect he could not also have imagined that he would be seen as a martyr for our liberal faith. Yet he was. He stood on the side of freedom and love and justice against a tangible, fierce enemy. His bravery speaks to us 70 years later and reminds us that we cannot sacrifice our freedom to think, to reason, to feel, to explore, to worship as we please. We cannot sacrifice our particular flavor of heresy to go along with the pack to stay safe. We must never turn our backs on those who need us. We must stand up for religious freedom. We must stand up when people wish to install their brand of religious law in our secular society, much like the example we had this morning. We must not choose safety over liberty, and we must remember how he died so that we do not ever become complacent to the power of war, authoritarianism, and bigotry. This is not a story just of long ago. We know very clearly these things are still happening today in that specific part of the world, again threatening peace in the entire world. Chapik reminds us that putting our faith into action sometimes means standing up for our faith. And he reminds us that we, yes, even we as ordinary people, can do extraordinary things. So let us join together today to connect with each other, to celebrate hope, to remember those who have gone before us, and to honor those who have sacrificed themselves to the cause of religious freedom.